What the fuck is holiness? And is saying fuck profaning myself? Yo, what's up? Welcome back to my Apostate's Bible read-through. Loud motorcycle just passed by. I'm going to be getting one of those things because that, I think, is holiness. But anyway, this week we're talking about Leviticus 19 through 21. So that's 19, 20, 21, and 22. I'm sorry, 19 through 22 this week. And the main theme that I want to talk about is the issue of holiness and how it has shifted from a cultural element in ancient Israel to a type of moral test almost. Now, what do I mean by it's become a moral test? Well, I think that when we use the word holy in our day-to-day experience, we think of somebody who's very pious, somebody who doesn't say bad words and doesn't drink and goes to church on Sundays and engages in these activities that we understand as being like morally pure. But I think that's a very different and maybe even distorted perspective on what holiness meant for, or what it means in Torah, we might say, and what it meant particularly for this theopolitical theocracy of ancient Israel as it is establishing itself through the use of its technologies of law. So what you get in this section in Leviticus are these perpetual proclamations, and you really see this throughout Torah in general, where Yahweh declares to Moses that he needs to speak on his behalf to the people, where he says, I am holy. You shall be holy, for I am holy. And then there's also another element to this where it's, as I took you out of Egypt and I set you apart, so now you too must be set apart similarly, right? And this is the issue that I think is most interesting. Like, sure, the law does have all of these prohibitions and prescriptions for how people are supposed to behave ethically. And sure, there are elements about maybe even like what we might call internal piety, like revering your mother and not having hate in your heart, which isn't just a New Testament concept, by the way. It does mention that in this section in Leviticus. Don't have hate in your heart towards your neighbor, and that sort of thing. The real issue about holiness, about sanctification and being sanctified, is being set apart. It's about the uniqueness. It's about the individuality. It's about the particularity of the people of Yahweh. The people of Yahweh are the people who are unique. They are unlike the people in the land of Canaan. They are unlike the Hittites and the Amorites, etc., 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 because they have been chosen. They are unique, and now their responsibility to this call is to be unique themselves, which is why, you bear the mark of circumcision, which is why you are obedient to honor the Sabbath, and then all these other prescriptions, whether it's prohibitions against eating certain types of fish and birds, or whether it's about prescriptions on how to engage in the sacrificial system, whether it's about not worshiping this type of God or those types of gods, or how you can even worship Yahweh, not through idols and graven images and things like that. All of these things are meant to make them holy in a cultural sense, set apart in a cultural sense. I think the reason that I find this so fascinating is that we have kind of distorted this, maybe even would say perverted this in the Christian legacy to become this moral test case of purity, right? Like, don't say the wrong things, don't think the wrong things, don't participate in the wrong social activities. Now, there's a cultural element there, of course, right? Like, Christians will say this is what was so big about the fundamentalist movement in the United States. You have Christian music, you have Christian restaurants, you have Christian radio stations and Christian bookstores and Christian art and all of these things that are meant to signify a type of cultural uniqueness and set apartness. And in a sense, I guess we can grant that there is. I think my only concern is that when so much emphasis becomes on the individual moral actions of supposed holiness or purity, what gets distorted is what really was meant, again, as preserving that horizontal element of being in and out of the community that we see most articulated in the Old Testament here, rather than, hey, how can I just make sure that I'm holy in relation to a holy God so that I can get vertically to heaven? Which is, I think, how it's kind of often interpreted in the Christian sense, right? Now, you might say, oh, but this is because it's a new covenant. You get the New Testament, which is like this sort of like progressive development. It's a new dispensation or something like that. Whatever terms you might want to use, depending on whatever kind of religious background you come from, you might say that, yeah, that's what's going on. It's like an unfolding development of God's unfolding revelation. And I get that, but I don't want to get too far ahead of myself and read that stuff back into the Old Testament. I kind of want to try to get as much as possible into the mind of the ancient Israelites and understand that what's going on here is precisely this in-out, this desire and this need to protect the community, to insulate the community, and to make them a unique and different type of community, at least in their own eyes. Whether or not they actually are or not is a very different issue. But again, we're reading a story of self-legitimation here. This is them trying to tell their own story so that they can preserve their narrative and then pass it on to future generations so that they can reproduce it perpetually, right? So that when new generations read this in the age of Second Temple Judaism, Rabbinic Judaism, once they're no longer in any sort of bondage or captivity or anything like that, that they can perpetuate, if you will, the sanctity, the holiness, the set-apartness of their own self-image of who they are as the people of Yahweh. Yeah, I think that's extremely important to just put in our minds and think about how holiness doesn't just mean that you don't have any fun and you don't drink and you don't smoke and you don't say bad words because you're going to make God angry, and you do that so that you can like make sure you get to heaven or something like that. That's really that's a very distorted understanding of what the notion of holiness is meaning to convey here. But it's rather much more about this idea of being an expression of the unique people that worship a unique God. And we have to tie this to monotheism. This is the establishment of monotheism. So rather than being torn and pulled in all of these different directions through polyistic, theurgic worships, you have this singular focus. There's a single God that has done a single set of activities, that he himself is holy in relation to you as being constituted as holy, and so therefore you have kind of a singular focus in your obedience to God as you establish your community moving forward as the holy people consecrated for Yahweh. So I hope that makes sense, but I think that's really interesting, and maybe it's a little bit abstract, but kind of mull this over and think about how this might be different, how we tend to think of holiness in like a post-Christian Western world. All right, that is it for this particular section. More soon. Like, subscribe, share, get your fucking friends in this. Tweet this shit out. Do whatever it is you got to do. I've had a couple of people hit me up on Twitter and Insta saying how much they have found value in this series. I know that there are a lot of people out there, whether they're religious or not religious, that are either curious about the Bible or they're wrestling with their own relationship with the church and stuff like that. So, let's try and see if we can get some more people involved in this. All right. I love you. Peace.